Hi,
Hello.
hi. I couldn't get in and then someone else couldn't get in and
It's always something with Zoom.
I know technology, you can't live with it and you can't live without it.
And you'd think we've been doing it for this long and it still keeps happening.
I know. Let's see. Well, we actually still have a minute to go before the official.
Oh, Carol, it's Kathy Collins.
Hi,
Uh,
Kathy.
that link you sent me worked, but Twyla wrote, Wynn did not get one either. Something happened to the link. Some of us did not get it. So I just sent her what you sent me. So hopefully she can use that to get in.
Okay. Yes, she can because I just did that with Donna.
Yeah, there was a problem. There must have been a glitch or something. And some of us did not receive the links.
Nothing personal.
I'm just saying, yeah, I know. I
I
mean,
know.
something happened to the system because I've not had that happen before. But
Well, I'm glad to see everyone here so far. Uh, we had 10 more people signed up, so I'm not sure. Let's just give them a couple minutes.
yeah, I'll see if she's.
And I have my email on, so in case I get an
Oh.
emergency.
Okay. See if I can give her a call.
Everyone enjoying this beautiful weather?
Mhm.
It's hard to stay inside.
The kids in my neighborhood, I live on a cul-de-sac, have pulled out every riding toy known to man. They were out there in the dark. You could tell they're just so happy to be outside.
It's awesome.
Can't blame them.
No, makes it a little challenging to pull into the driveway though, because I live next to a house where there are 7 children. They
Oh,
are
Wow.
running around in the cul-de-sac and it gets a little dicey, just my husband and I are so careful.
7 children
They
riding around in a cul-de-sac.
well, they just
Wow.
had their seventh, so that one is not going anywhere. But yes, it is. It's a lot of kids. They're adorable.
Did
We just have,
anyone see the governor's budget address today? He
No.
was amazing. And he's establishing a Department of Gun Violence Prevention and funding period products in all Pennsylvania public schools, so that if girls need help during the school day or aren't going to school because they don't have period products, Pennsylvania is now funding it in public school bathrooms. How about that?
that's
Wonderful.
awesome.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Well, it's about time. Or even some of them didn't have money. We had machines, but you had to have money to buy the stuff.
Right.
Right.
Well, what's the consensus? Should we get started? There are still about 5 people not on. Give me a thumbs up if you think we should.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to welcome you all to this evening's PBWPA Legislative Platform Forum on combating domestic violence, a situation that our presenter tonight has called out as an immense problem in Pennsylvania. As a group, BPWPA is certainly cognizant of the problem, and we address it in our legislative platform, such as actively supporting and promoting actions to combat domestic violence as adequate and full funding for protection and services for victims and survivors, and also supporting background checks for gun purchases that prevent domestic abusers from purchasing and keeping firearms. But maybe there is something additional, some additional actions we might consider in addressing the issue. And our presenter this evening, Rachel Haynes Pinsker, is uniquely positioned to expand our awareness in that direction. Rachel has devoted her entire legal career to assisting victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. She's currently the managing attorney for the Domestic Violence Legal Center located in Lancaster County. And prior to that, she served as the legal services manager for the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Rachel set off the Lily Joya radar with an article that she published last February in the Inquirer entitled, "Domestic Violence is an Immense Problem in Pennsylvania. Governor Shapiro should make it a priority." And that article is what led Lily and me to contact her to be the presenter for this forum. So this evening, she's going to address the services and programs that are in place now in Pennsylvania, how they're working, some of the barriers to their effectiveness, and then also some suggestions for how those barriers could be removed, and even possible actions that we as an organization could take. She also encourages questions from you. So as we go through, I don't know, Rachel, do you want to be interrupted or just kind of, we can have them go into chat?
I am honestly flexible. I much prefer to have a discussion. I enjoy the back and forth. So you can put it in the chat. I'll monitor it. If you want to raise your human hand or your Zoom hand in the screen. Yeah. So whatever makes the most sense.
Okay. And the one last thing I want to mention, I hope you're all aware that this is being recorded and it's going to be posted at the YouTube channel for BPW. So I'm going to close my mouth, zip up, turn it over to the presenter and become a listener because I'm as eager as everybody else is here to hear what you have to say. Welcome.
Thank you. And Carol, can you make me a co-host so I can share my screen with the group?
Michelle, are you on? Let's see. I did ask her about that. No.
Is that the one who set up the? I can try to share my screen right now and we can see if it works. Should
Okay,
we?
she said multiple people would be able to.
Okay. Can you all see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, then there
It
we go.
worked.
Can everyone see that? Perfect. Okay, great. It worked on its own. Again, technology is working. That's a good thing. Well,
Yes.
thank you. I was so thrilled when Carol and Lily reached out to me, and I'm honestly honored to speak to you all tonight. And, I sadly never tire of talking about domestic violence because it's my life's work and it's so incredibly important. And I'm always so glad when people want to talk about it and want to learn more and to be informed. And as Carol said, last year, I suppose after Governor Shapiro got elected, my husband and I were sitting around talking one night and, we both supported Governor Shapiro and we were talking about the new administration and how exciting it is. And I started talking about, I bet he'll be open to domestic violence and what to do. And my husband looked at me and said, "Why don't you write an op-ed?" And I said, what are you talking about? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, no, write an op-ed. And that's what I did. And it was ended up being published in the Philadelphia Inquirer last February. And Lily and Carol saw it and read it. So that's why I'm here. So my husband does get some credit for that because he did encourage me. I also, when I spoke to Lily and Carol prior to speaking to you tonight, they shared with me a copy of the resolution that you've drafted for some policy suggestions around domestic violence, and I think it's fantastic. And I'm not sure the process that you move forward when you do resolutions, but I certainly was very glad to see it. And see that it's something that hopefully you're going to, try to move forward. So we're going to talk about intimate partner violence. Now, I might interchangeably use domestic violence and intimate partner violence. It means the same thing, but intimate partner violence is a more updated way of referring to domestic violence because it's more encompassing of the types of violence that occur. But again, you'll probably hear me interchangeably say domestic violence or intimate partner violence, but I'm referring to the same thing. So does this number surprise anyone? 10 million women and men are physically abused by an intimate partner every year. Hand up if it surprises you. Okay, Carol. Okay, surprises some of you, right? Doesn't surprise, I think, most of you. And the sad truth of it is, this number is probably incredibly underreported because we know crimes of domestic violence and crimes of sexual assault are vastly underreported because individuals are ashamed and they don't want to seek law enforcement's help. But domestic violence is the most common tort that's committed in the United States. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced severe physical violence. And although research tells us that by and large domestic violence occurs to primarily women, it happens to everyone. It happens to everyone regardless of age, gender, race, education level, socioeconomic background. It doesn't matter. And that's really important to know. So in the resolution that you drafted, you referenced the fatality report that the Pennsylvania Coalition puts out every year. You referenced the 2021 fatality report, but there's now been the 2022 fatality report. And PCADV gathers this every year anecdotally because there is no way that Pennsylvania state officially tracks domestic violence homicides. But in 2022, there were 104 victims who lost their lives to domestic violence. And you can see PCADV does it county by county to show you what happened. And in the last 10 years, more than 1,400 people have died from domestic violence related incidents in Pennsylvania. Those killed included women, children, and men, again, of all ages, races, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic groups. In 2022, 104 victims lost their lives. That included 62 women and 42 men. And there were also 17 perpetrator deaths. And so that goes to show you the scope of domestic violence homicides in Pennsylvania in 2022. And again, because there's no formalized way of gathering this data in terms of domestic violence homicide, this number is also underreported. It's higher than the fatality report's numbers, simply because there's no good way to gather it. And we know that it costs $156 billion estimated economic lifetime burden of intimate partner violence in Pennsylvania. That's a huge number, right? Huge. We also know that in 2022, there were 3,030 victims served by domestic violence programs in one day. That doesn't mean that all of the individuals seeking services were served, because domestic violence programs simply don't have the capacity to serve everyone who comes to them. But that's just a glimpse of the scope of the domestic violence issue. And this chart reflects data that's gathered by the Administrative Office of the Pennsylvania Courts, otherwise known as the AOPC. And their data tells us that in 2022, over 40,000 protection from abuse matters were filed in the state of Pennsylvania. So unfortunately, domestic violence is big business and it's constant and it's not going away. So when someone says, what is domestic violence? What comes to your mind? Again, you can raise your hand, you can put it in the chat.
Rachel,
Yes.
Donna
Oh.
Weinstein here. Hi.
Yes.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that one or the other partners is beating up on the other partner.
Okay.
But I know it also has to do not with physical threats or actual physical violence, but also with mental threats against the other person.
Okay, so again, what you just said is, the first thing that comes to your mind, right, is the physical part, right? Again, what is kind of most outwardly obvious, but there's much more to domestic violence than physical abuse. And you referenced, I think, mental abuse as well as a piece of it.
Yes.
I'm
So
sorry,
what
say that again. You kind of
Oh,
walked
I'm
out.
sorry. You also referenced mental abuse as a piece of domestic violence.
Yes.
What else? What else comes to mind when you hear the phrase domestic violence?
There's verbal abuse.
Okay. And when you say verbal abuse, what do you mean?
Basically the partner is berating the other person to the point where they feel like they're less of a person
Okay.
than the other person.
Okay, absolutely. So domestic violence is more than physical abuse. There's a lot of components that go into domestic violence. And I don't know if anyone's ever seen the Power and Control Wheel. It's been around for some time. It was created by the Duluth Women's Project back in the 80s. And I think Amanda just typed into the chat financial abuse. Absolutely. So the physical abuse is the outer part of the wheel. And physical abuse is something that outsiders kind of can readily see, right? You see a black eye, you see a broken arm, you see bruises, right? That's tangible. But domestic violence isn't just about the physical, it's about power and control. It is about exerting the power and control over their victim. And in order to do that, domestic abusers have to use different spokes in this wheel to assert that control. And so what that looks like is verbal and emotional abuse. Absolutely. I can't tell you how many clients have said to me over the years, I wish they just would have hit me. It would have been better than them telling me I was fat and I was stupid and I was worthless. Because when you're constantly told that and you're verbally and emotionally abused, you have no sense of self anymore, right? You have absolutely no sense of self. And that's a good thing for the abuser, because when you don't have a good sense of yourself, you can be easily controlled. Isolation is another big piece of the domestic abuse puzzle. Oftentimes clients will say, well, when we started dating, they said, I just want to be with you all the time. Don't go see your mom. Don't go see your friends. I just want to be with you. I love you. Right. And the victim thought that was wonderful until it wasn't, because what that abuser does is isolate that victim so they don't have any friends left. They don't have a good relationship with their mother anymore. So if they are trying to seek help, they don't have anyone to turn to. There's minimizing, denying, and blaming. It's your fault. If you wouldn't have been so stupid, this wouldn't have happened. Abusers often use children as a way to control, threatening that they will take the children away from the victim. And, as a mother, having my children taken away, I can't think of anything worse than that. And so oftentimes my clients will toe the line and try to keep things okay because they're scared of what will happen to their children. Abusers oftentimes use privilege. It's my way or the highway. And financial abuse is such a huge component of domestic violence. My clients oftentimes aren't able to work. if they are able to work, they have to turn their paycheck over to the abuser. My clients, a lot of times don't have access to a shared bank account. They don't have a credit card. They don't have a debit card. They have to ask for money to go to the grocery store. Abusers also are pretty good at destroying a victim's credit. They'll say, no, 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 can you just put the PPL bill in your name? I'll pay it. And they don't pay it, right? And then that victim's credit is destroyed. And so if you have someone experiencing domestic violence and they want to try to get away, and maybe they don't have friends they can reach out to, they don't have a parent they can reach out to, and they have nowhere to go, and they have no debit card, they have no credit card. Where can they go? Can they get a hotel room? No, because the abuser has made them entirely financially dependent on them. And that's a pretty powerful thing. There's also force and threats of harm. Sometimes abusers don't even have to get physical, because the mere threat to do so is enough for the victim to know that, I know my place, because it's going to be worse if I do this. And obviously intimidation. So abusers don't always use all of these pieces of the puzzle, but they use many of them. And they do that to ultimately exercise power and control over their victim. And in order to exercise power and control over their victim, it takes time, right? And again, how many of us have or were in relationships that didn't work out so good, right? Weren't abusive, but maybe, you get together, you break up, you get together and you break up, and you don't understand what went wrong and you want to fix it. It is no different for a victim of domestic violence, except there's also the component of abuse. And so it is such a strong pull for them to, again, like most people, right, try to go back and undo the wrong. So again, I really find the power and control wheel to be an incredibly helpful tool. The power and control wheel, like I said, it's been around for a while, so it has a lot of iterations. If you Google power and control wheel, it'll come up. They have a teen dating violence power and control wheel. They have an LGBTQ power and control wheel. So it's something, again, that's a really useful tool. Does anyone have any questions about the power and control wheel? Since I can't see everyone all at the same time, I just want to make sure. Okay. And again, you cited this in the resolution that you drafted, but we know the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. It's astronomical what happens when abusers have access to a firearm. And there are some legal restrictions that can prohibit some abusers from possessing a firearm. But there's currently a case that the Supreme Court heard arguments on, I believe it was, oh gosh, was that last month, where an appeals court overturned the ability of a gun to be taken away from a domestic abuser. And that's pretty terrifying. And again, with the current composition of the Supreme Court, I'd like to be hopeful that they will make the right decision, but that's not something that can be guaranteed. But they should be making a decision on that case probably this summer. So that's something to definitely keep an eye out, because that can have a huge impact. The other thing that is incredibly common in domestic violence situations is strangulation. But victims of domestic violence rarely refer to it as strangulation. They refer to it as being choked. Well, being choked is when you eat a piece of chicken and the chicken gets stuck in your throat and you can't breathe. That is choking. Strangulation is when someone, usually manually, compresses your airway and you can't breathe. And it doesn't really take much force at all to strangle someone to death, to the point that the airflow is cut off from their brain. And again, strangulation, a prior incidence of strangulation is one of the best predictors of lethality in a domestic violence situation. So when I have a client that I'm interviewing that says, oh yeah, they choked me, I have a huge red flag that goes off, because oftentimes people that have experienced that don't understand or recognize the severity of that. And I immediately say, did you get medical attention? And if you didn't, you need to, because there can be long-lasting damage from the act of strangulation that might not be apparent at the initial time of the strangulation. The good news is in 2016, Pennsylvania added strangulation to the criminal code. Prior to strangulation being added to the criminal code, if someone strangled someone, they might be charged with simple assault, which is a misdemeanor, which doesn't have a huge impact. So now strangulation is a felony under the criminal code when you strangle an intimate partner or a family member. And so once Pennsylvania added strangulation to the criminal code, it really recognized the lethality and the severity of strangulation. And so that certainly was a step in the right direction, because Pennsylvania was a little slow to adopt that, because many other states had already adopted strangulation, and and that showed the seriousness of it. So one of the things that's always brought up, and I've heard, gosh, I've been doing this now for 20 years, is why didn't they just leave, right? That's the question a lot of people say. Well, if it were me, I'd be out the door, right? I would not put up with that. There's just simply no way I would stand for that. And instead of me talking to you about why it is so challenging for victims to leave an abusive relationship, I'm going to let victims who've experienced it express that to you. So I'm just going to play a short video clip. You should be good on volume. If you're not, start waving the hands, okay?
It is the question that I'm asked the most. Why did I stay? Why does any woman stay? And for the life of me, I can't understand why people are obsessed with it, because to me, it's so obvious. Why does anybody stay with somebody that they love? You know, we've all been in relationships that, even if they weren't abusive, we're not working any longer, and we all stay far longer than we want. And you stay for the same reasons. You stay because you love the person, or you love what you used to have, or you're trying to take care of your children.
When we ask, why did you stay, we're blaming the victim for their abuse, as opposed to asking, why did you hit this person? Or why are you violent? Or why do you feel the need to be violent?
Why would somebody abuse? Why would somebody beat the people who love him or her most on earth? Until we ask that question, we won't be able to obliterate domestic violence. We have got to focus on the perpetrators of violence, not the victims.
It's cliche, but he really was Prince Charming. He was very kind and sweet and nice. I left what I was doing to come and be with him, and I was alone with him. I didn't have any friends or family in the area. I couldn't find a job, so he paid the bills. And so we got into an argument, and that's the first time that he hit me. He actually threw me up against the wall and started to choke me. And I didn't really understand what was happening, because he was not that person all this time. And so when he finally let me go, I thought it was something I did. I wasn't thinking to run. After we got married, it didn't stop. It just got worse and worse and worse. And I felt like I was trapped. At that point, we had moved from where we were across the country again, and I was further isolated. I didn't have any friends or family, and essentially he still was the breadwinner. I was dependent on him. So if I left, what was I gonna do? Where was I gonna go? How was I gonna take care of myself? I felt like no one would understand, and I felt like no one would care.
The first full-out physical attack was 5 days before the wedding. Part of me knew I had to leave him right then, that I couldn't marry somebody who had done this. But then this other part of me said, but wait, it was one time. And I told myself he'd never do it again, that I was sure he was very sorry, and I didn't leave. I married him.
You stayed with this guy.
Yeah, I didn't have a choice. I mean, he told me, and I absolutely, you know, that's the part that always, it's so interesting to me. It's like, you know, the standard question, why did you leave? Why did you leave? Why did you leave? Well, he was trained by the United States Marine Corps to hunt people down and kill them, and he told me if I left, he would hunt me down and kill me. That's why I didn't leave. I used to pull what he would call my disappearing acts, and that would be, I would, you know, get the boys and get out because it just was getting too intense. But I would always go back because at least I knew where he was. At least I knew the routine. I knew what to expect. But, you know, it's a terrible way to live, to always be looking over your shoulder. He didn't start out with being abusive. He started out with being incredibly sweet and incredibly attentive and incredibly thoughtful and incredibly kind and saying things to me that no one had ever said and paying attention to me in ways that no one ever had. You know, and I was really taken by it.
One of the reasons why we stay is because the behavior is such a drastic change from the person we met in the beginning. And we're constantly looking for the man in the beginning instead of concentrating on the man that is in front of us. Once I understood that, then I made the decision, you know, I gotta go. This is not the same man I married. I mean, I love him, but he's gonna kill me.
With every violent moment, I felt further connected to him in this kind of twisted way. I felt that, you know, we had this secret that bound us together and that this was something big and we were working on it. And so we had to stay together until we worked it out. The violence got to a point where I realized that I could die. I had to create a plan. I had to figure out where I was gonna go and how I was gonna get there and who I was gonna reach out to for help, if there was any. I was scared. I was afraid that he would find me. I was afraid that he would be so angry that I left, that he would come after me. I couldn't just get up and walk away.
And it was the most terrible feeling to know that I could leave and I still couldn't leave because I was bound by this psychological trap that I thought was love, that wasn't love. You know, I had so much denial. If you had come to me and said, are you being physically abused? You know, if my doctor had asked me or a best friend, I would have said, no, I'm not being physically abused.
You do feel isolated and you keep a lot of secrets. You know, you keep a lot of secrets in your heart, in your home, in your head. I stayed because I believed him when he said he wasn't gonna do it again. I stayed because I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have any money. I didn't have access to any resources. I stayed because my religious community convinced me that I couldn't get divorced because God would hate me. I stayed because I loved him. You know, I stayed because he was the love of my life, and I wanted to believe that love could conquer all, including abuse.
It's really powerful, you know, to hear directly from women who've experienced it. And all the people I've trained throughout my career, one of my wishes is that that after going through a training, they recognize that the question to ask is not why they didn't leave, but why was that person abusing them? So that's always my hope. I think there's someone in the chat. Yeah, it's incredibly powerful, Amanda. I mean, this is not obviously my first time watching this video, and every time I watch it, it is still as powerful. You know, so again, I definitely think one thing that needs to happen is we need to change the conversation. We need to change the question being asked. It should not be put on to the person experiencing the domestic violence. It's not their fault. Believe me, they already think it's their fault for a multitude of reasons. It's the fault of the person doing the abuse. And again, and that's a really, I think, important step to kind of shift the power dynamic and the conversation around domestic violence. So, what does Pennsylvania do? So, again, Pennsylvania does not have a crime that is a domestic violence crime. Some states do. Pennsylvania does not. If you assault someone, you're charged with simple assault. If you really assault someone, you're charged with aggravated assault, which is a felony, or now you can be charged with strangulation. And it goes through the criminal process. So that's the criminal piece of it. And again, there's a variety of reasons why victims don't contact the police. They don't trust the police. Maybe they've contacted them in the past and the police simply just didn't really do anything. Oftentimes, victims of domestic violence don't want to see their abuser get in trouble. They don't want to see them go to jail. So there's a variety of reasons why. So if a victim is not kind of pursuing a criminal resolution to what's happening, they can pursue it civilly. Every state in the country, including Pennsylvania, offers a civil protection option where someone can file a protection from abuse matter against their abuser. Again, it's civil, it's not criminal. The burden of proof to obtain a protective order is much lower than criminal court, and a protective order can order someone not to abuse, stalk, or harass them and to stay away from them. And I often get asked, it's just a piece of paper. What good does it do? And yes, it is just a piece of paper, but they're actually pretty effective in helping calm things down. And the truth is, we don't hear when PFAs are actually working, right? Because that's not newsworthy. We hear about situations where a victim did everything right. They contacted the police, they filed for a protective order, and they were murdered anyway. And that's when people understandably say the PFA was worthless. But again, those are the exception and not the rule. You know, in many counties, PFA court is once a week. In Philadelphia, obviously, it runs every day. It really is a form of relief that is used a lot by victims of domestic violence, kind of on their path, sometimes to leaving an abusive situation. So those are the two main ways through the legal system to combat domestic violence in Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, as we know, there are 67 different counties which have 67 different ways of doing things. And there are 59 domestic violence programs that serve all 67 counties. There is not a domestic violence program in every county because, as we know, we have some counties in Pennsylvania that are pretty small. And so there are a handful of domestic violence programs that serve multiple counties. And they provide free assistance to all victims of domestic violence. That includes emergency housing. It includes counseling services. It includes children's programming. It includes sometimes getting your car fixed. Some domestic violence programs, like the one that I work for, has transitional housing for someone who moves kind of beyond the shelter stage into a more transitional housing before they can find permanent housing. And domestic violence programs, like a lot of nonprofits, are certainly underfunded, but every domestic violence program I have worked for, and I've worked for multiple ones throughout my career, they do a lot with very, very few resources. But you have to know that staying at a shelter, someone can stay there for 30 days, maybe 60 days, and that's it, right? Domestic violence programs simply don't have the capacity to shelter more people for longer, because if they only have the capacity to shelter 15 people at their facility and they keep someone, let's say, for a year, then that means that multiple other people are not going to be able to be sheltered. And so when you think about why a victim didn't leave, Would you be able to leave a domestic violence situation if you had no money and no support system, and your only option was to go to a domestic violence program where you could stay maybe a month, maybe 60 days, and you were expected within that very short window to figure out where you're going to live, get a job. If you have children, get your children situated. That's a lot, right? Absolutely a lot. And domestic violence programs do an incredible job in helping people through that situation. But obviously, at the end of the day, their resources are limited. But there is a domestic violence program that services every single county in Pennsylvania, and they run 365 days a year, 24/7. Anyone have any questions about domestic violence programs in Pennsylvania?
This is Amanda.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm a wreck today, so I'm not sure. I'm not on video.
That's
Does Pennsylvania have any requirements for the abuser that once a situation is either civil or criminal, is there anything that is required at all?
When you say required, what do you mean?
Like court mandated. So whether it's an anger management class, whether they have to fork over some funds, whether, I mean, is there literally
Sure.
anything that
Yes.
is required?
So, yes, and it's going to vary obviously county to county. So
Mhm.
oftentimes when someone is either pleading guilty or found guilty of a crime where domestic violence was a component, they usually have special domestic violence conditions. Sometimes that involves counseling. Sometimes that involves going to a batterer's intervention program. It honestly just depends. It is really very different, but there is no one size fits all mandate across the county. I'm sorry, across the state for addressing domestic violence programs. And counties really vary in terms of some counties don't offer batterers intervention services. Other counties offer anger management programs, which again, I'm not a fan of anger management because domestic violence is not about how to learn how to manage your anger.
Yes, totally,
not-
totally
yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Right. So there are different programs. There are still certainly plenty of anger management programs, but some counties actually have batterers intervention programs, which I think are more valuable to, if that, I guess that's, yeah, I think that would be more valuable. But, you know, yeah, those can be absolutely built in to someone's probation or parole terms. But usually if someone files a civil protection order, a lot of times counseling, evaluations are not a component of those civil orders. So.
Is there something that you would recommend just with your experience and expertise for Pennsylvania? Like if we were all to kind of pour our energy into getting some kind of regulation or law passed, whether it's within the county or within the state, like what would you put at the top of your list where people should be putting their attention instead of kind of all these patchwork, you know, kind of band-aids and insufficient programs overall?
Boy,
what should we be doing?
Boy, oh my gosh, that's such a tough question to answer, because I don't know if I'm aware of a batterers intervention program that is highly successful, you know, and is evidence-based. If there's one program that I think should be implemented throughout the state, it's the lethality assessment program. And so the lethality assessment program, otherwise known as LAP, was rolled out by the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, which is the same. Every state has a domestic violence coalition. In Pennsylvania, it's PCADV. In Maryland, it's MNADV. And what Maryland did is there is a researcher at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Jacqueline Campbell, who, and she was a nurse. And what she started realizing is that victims of domestic violence that were homicide victims before they had been murdered, they had rarely been in touch with the domestic violence program prior to their murder. And she started studying that and gathered statistics and found that only 4% of victims of domestic violence that were ultimately killed by their abuser had ever been in contact with the domestic violence program. And so the thought was, let's get victims in touch with domestic violence programs sooner
Yeah.
as a way to help them get the services they need and hopefully, get them out of a situation that can lead to a domestic violence homicide. And it's an 11-question screening that when law enforcement is called to a domestic violence incident, they administer. And based on the responses to those 11 questions, you score them. And the officer will know if someone's at high risk of being killed by their abuser. And if they are at high risk, that officer immediately connects them with a domestic violence program. Doesn't just say, here's a card, go call them if you want to. They make that immediate connection. So it's a program where domestic violence programs and law enforcement work hand in hand. And so the MNADV rolled that out across the entire state of Maryland. And in 2012, the Pennsylvania Coalition, with some funding from the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, started rolling it out through the state. And they've been doing it for 10 years. And at this point, the lethality assessment program has been implemented by 48 of the domestic violence programs and 436 police departments, which sounds like a lot, but frankly, it isn't, right? Pennsylvania is a big state. We have a lot of law enforcement departments. And so that really only represents 1/3 of all police departments throughout the state. So if there's one thing I could ask for, it would be that the lethality assessment program is implemented statewide because it's evidence-based. And it is a way to connect really, really vulnerable victims to life-saving services.
Can I just say something, Rachel?
Oh, absolutely.
One of the things that you mentioned to Lily and me was that the state police don't administer that.
Not officially. No, not
right.
officially. No.
And so,
And so, Pennsylvania's a big state, it's a rural state, right? So Pennsylvania State Police provide a lot of coverage in a lot of places that don't have local law enforcement. And so if PSP isn't able to get on board with the lethality assessment program, there's no way to implement it throughout the state. So that's a big barrier. And, PCADV has been working on that for some time. But it's quite a challenge. So I think, Mary, you had a question. What's your question, Mary?
It's rather specific, but
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. A while ago, I was on one of the community domestic violence coalitions between the police department and the domestic violence group and the community. And one of the things that the police officers told us was the fact that if the perpetrator is under the age of 18, that they cannot remove the perpetrator from the house. Is that still the case?
Well,
because they're a minor.
So I don't know that I can entirely answer that because,
Okay.
again, I'm not quite sure, if there are special rules for a minor, but when someone commits a crime and they're charged, they can be placed under arrest and removed. And you can file a protective order against a minor.
You can, okay.
Yes, and you can get an order that orders that person to be evicted and excluded. So I'm not sure what that officer was referring to, and it very well may be that, there are some different rules with minors. And again, in that situation, I don't know who was the victim. Was it the parent? But again, I don't think that's entirely accurate.
Okay.
Minors are charged with crimes. I see minors where protection from abuse orders are filed against them. I mean, all of those same things apply to minors.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if that answers that, yeah. Um,
I have another question if somebody else doesn't have a question, because a few years ago, a friend and I wanted to put together a brochure, and we did it,
Okay.
that listed the information for 5 counties, where to call, where to go to, if you want to learn anything about if you're being abused.
okay.
One of the things that really occurred to us is that people really don't know where to go a lot. And as
Sure.
part of that, we did end up making a number of brochures. We put them in doctors' offices and in libraries, and they were snatched up very quickly, and people
Yeah,
wanted
sure.
more, but we just didn't have the funds to, keep churning out these brochures.
Right.
But one of the things that I found out when we were working on it, that is a lot of the websites are extremely confusing.
Mm.
And this may be too in the weeds, but it took a lot of picking around on the website of the county, domestic violence services, just to find the information that we could put in the brochure.
Sure.
And they just weren't a very user friendly. And so we were just thinking really of the communications issues, both in getting, brochures and information in all the places that, people will go. But also just that whatever funds are being used to create these websites seem to be very antiquated, and just many of them just confusing and not well done. And I know it may seem kind of like a little issue, but it was really confounding as we were trying to create something to get information out, because we realized even if somebody went to some of those sites, it still would not be that easy. And so I was wondering, is there anything that kind of addresses that communication part of this?
So, in terms of resources, are you talking about where someone can go when they need to find out where they can go to get help?
Yes. So
Okay.
kind of the official county
Oh.
website page that you go to, that is often, there's a lot of other victim services on it, or
Yes.
kind of take
So,
it.
well, again, right, 67 counties, 67 different ways of doing things. And so some counties are better than others, but yes, I agree. When you go to, county government websites, it's, looking for a needle in a haystack. And unless you use it often, you don't really know what you're looking for. And
Yeah.
so I think what may be a more efficient way is to go to the website of that domestic violence program that actually provides services for that county.
Mhm.
And it's possible that their website might have the information gathered in one location that might be more user friendly than, let's say, going to Erie County, services.
Yeah.
The other place where all the information is centralized is on the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence's website.
Okay.
So, and they redid their website, I don't know, 5 years ago, and it looks really good, and it's clear. And they don't get county specific because they can't, but they have links to every single domestic violence program in the state if you need to know, what program services where you live. And they
Mhm.
also have obviously a lot of information about domestic violence services throughout the state.
Okay.
But I would say I would zero in on the website for the local domestic violence program, and it might be more user friendly to maybe start there.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
And Teresa said, is calling 211 across the state or just in my county? So yes, do you have a question about 211, Teresa? Oh, you're muted, Teresa.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I know someone spoke to our BPW meeting about a woman from the United Way about 211, but I wasn't sure if that was just our county or if that was across the state. And it
211's
was,
across, yeah, 211's across the state, but 211 is not a domestic violence hotline.
oh, they wouldn't have those services to provide or information to provide them.
I mean, they may have information to say, oh, you need to call here, but again, it's not a domestic violence service.
Right.
You know, it has a lot of valuable things. But no, it's not domestic violence
Okay,
focused. Yeah.
thank you.
Absolutely. And so, you know, one of the things I wrote about in the op-ed I wrote is that, you know, Pennsylvania has always provided important resources to victims of domestic violence, but these resources rely on a loose network of multiple government agencies and nonprofits to distribute those services and provide supports. And there is no single state agency or director in Pennsylvania responsible for the response. And none of the 7 main departments of the Department of Human Services are exclusively devoted to domestic violence. And so what I was asking for in my op-ed is, let's make that position, let's make that department within the state government to really focus on domestic violence and show how serious domestic violence is being taken by the state, because not every state is like that. In New York State, they have the country's only executive level state agency dedicated to gender-based violence. It's called the Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, and that was created in 1982. And so in my op-ed, my wish to, you know, Governor Shapiro was, you know, let's be very public about supporting domestic violence and how important it is to your agency, and create this office. I was really excited when Governor Shapiro gave his budget address yesterday, because he did propose a pretty good increase in funding for domestic violence programs. And so that was really exciting to all of us who work at programs, and certainly hopefully that's something that will ultimately be passed in the state budget. But as we all know, we'll have to wait and see what happens in terms of the budget. But he did ask for an increase in the funding.
But no special office for.
No, no. But hey, more funding is certainly always welcome. So, you know, we're excited, we're cautiously optimistic, because as any of us who live in Pennsylvania know, you know, it remains to be seen what happens with the budget and when the budget actually gets passed, and all of, you know, the horse trading that goes into the budget. But, you know, that's certainly a good place to start. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, absolutely.
My name is Jean White, and I'm a BPW member. I'm calling, asking about, is there any program for training and teaching young girls, like in junior high, about this whole domestic sort of violence situation? Because they get into trouble in dating and all kinds of situations.
Oh, yeah.
And I just wondered, is there any, like in their health programs or anything, is there any information given to them? You know, that they're at that age, they're usually in a most romantic situation. They think,
Yes.
you know, the love is wonderful and all that sort of thing. And they're
Absolutely.
looking forward to it and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
They have to be warned, I think, and told what they can do and things that need to be done. And I just wondered, is that part of the education in Pennsylvania or not? Do you know?
I don't believe statewide it's mandatory. I do know, like, for instance, the Lancaster County Domestic Violence Program has a community education component to it. And we have advocates who go out to the schools when they're invited, and do, you know, trainings to school age kids about, you know, healthy relationships. So it is a component in some areas and some counties. but I don't believe it's something that is mandatory, although as you said, it's incredibly valuable. And, you know, particularly for junior high, right, is when, you know, kids start to go a little crazy, right? They start to realize, you know, they
And they
might
can be
have
terribly naive.
yes,
And if they haven't been exposed to
yes, right.
domestic violence, that they just don't know anything. And
Sure.
I just think it should be part of their, like the girls' health program that should be in the program, that they would definitely receive the idea that, you know, that they don't have to put up with that kind of stuff, and it's not right and that sort of thing.
And it
Because
absolutely should be for boys too, right? Because boys are one half of the problem. And certainly,
no, they're not one half.
well, they're one half of the piece.
They're a bigger piece than that. But when it comes to warning the girls, I think that's a different thing than bringing the boys up to speed on how they should treat women. That's a whole different thing.
Well, sure, absolutely. And, you know, there needs to be education all around, right? And it needs to start young, right? It needs to be something that's talked about.
Yeah, because
you know, I,
if a girl gets in a dating situation
right,
with a guy that's pressuring her and all kind of things to do God knows what, and gets violent when she doesn't want to do whatever it is, she should fight back. And a girl might think it's not good to fight back with a guy because he knows best. You know, they
sure.
have all kind of things in their head about, you know, where there should be in a relationship. So
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have two sons. One is a freshman in college, and they've been hearing it from me since they could walk. And that's how they grew up, you know, just talking about it and being open. And, you know, a lot of people aren't exposed to that. And that, you know, would be something that, you know, I think could be incredibly valuable. So what can you do about domestic violence? And I want to be respectful of our time. Um, so, educate yourself like you're doing tonight, right? Learn, right? Be exposed, read. There's so many resources online, trainings, you know, obviously educate yourself and educate others, talk about it, right? One of the reasons why domestic violence is so insidious is it's not talked about, right? It's private. What happens in your house stays in your house. It's shameful. But talk about it and educate others and start conversations. Encourage legislation like the proposal that you know you created. Absolutely encourage legislation. Encourage the government to increase funding for domestic violence programs. Volunteer. Domestic violence programs always need volunteers. They always need assistance. They always need resources. They need diapers, all of those things, small and large. And so, you know, you can help by volunteering in a myriad of ways. And obviously financial support. No matter what, domestic violence programs are always underfunded and are always in need of financial assistance. And so there's a lot of ways that people can help and get involved and support eradicating domestic violence. And again, as I said earlier, I think a great resource in Pennsylvania is the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence's website, pcadv.org. And it has a plethora of resources and a list of all of the domestic violence programs that serve the entire state of Pennsylvania. And I did put up here my contact information if you have any other questions, but I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I know we're kind of, oh, I think we're a little after 8. So like I said, I wanna be respectful of everyone's time, but I didn't know if anyone had any other questions or any thing else you'd like to talk about before we sign up. Yes, Carol.
So the whole point of the op-ed you wrote was to encourage the governor to create a special department and modeling after Maryland and also New York State. Did you ever get any response from the Shapiro?
No.
And is that the resolution that we're working on, that we're going to propose to our group? That's what we're asking for, that we would advocate for that. So what do you think would be the most effective way for us to go about having the ear? And
Well,
do you think it's an even feasible? It seems like he would be receptive. He's done a lot of other things.
yes. I mean, I would think he's receptive. I think obviously he's a governor. He's incredibly busy. I think it would be something that would be relatively simple to have happen. He certainly created all kinds of initiatives so far in different departments. So I would imagine, but again, I would assume the administration has quite a long list.
Right.
And I don't know how you get on that list and how you climb to the top. I certainly know, people had circulated it to people in the governor's office. And again, you know how these things are, who saw it, where it went, unfortunately, I just can't speak to that. So.
Would
Do
it,
you know any other organizations that are pushing for this, or we could maybe collaborate with?
I honestly don't know. I know that, an organization like PCADB obviously is right now really invested in advocating for an increase in funding, and as we kind of go into the budget season, that's certainly a large focus
Right.
for them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think, part of it is you just have to kind of get lucky and get the right person's attention at the right time.
Timing.
Timing is everything, as they say. Yes, absolutely. So,
Thank you so much for this presentation tonight. It really was so informative. Yes, let's give her a hand, everybody.
well, thank you. And again, I can't thank you enough for asking me to speak. I'm honored, and I'm always, for lack of a better word, I don't want to say I'm pleased to talk about domestic violence, because obviously I'm not. Because it's awful that, I've been talking about it for 20 plus years, and there's no sign that I'm going to stop talking about it. But I'm absolutely always thrilled to educate people and to engage in conversations, about domestic violence, and hopefully, just open people's minds and hopefully encourage support and change. So again, thank you for that opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone.
Bye, Carol. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.